Welcome to Estate Planning with Bernard Law.
Welcome to Estate Planning with Bernard Law. Daniel Bernard is an estate planning attorney who helps individuals and families in New York and Florida protect their assets, avoid probate, and build plans that honor their legacy. I'm your host, Sophia Morales, and today's episode is, Do You Really Need a Trust? The truth about revocable and irrevocable trusts. Welcome back, Daniel. I'm so happy to have you here with me today.
It's great to be back. I'm so excited to talk about trusts.
Me too. Let's start with some of the fundamentals on that. What is the difference between a trust and a will?
Sure. So the simplest difference is that a trust does not have to go through the surrogate's court, that probate process, whereas a will, no matter how great that will is drafted, it by definition is going to have to go through that surrogate's court process, that probate process. So trusts are vehicles that we can use to avoid that probate process.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm kind of sold on that then. What is the difference between revocable and an irrevocable trust?
Sure. So the flippant answer would be to say one is revocable, one is irrevocable.
Yeah, but you don't get to define using the word.
To dig in a little bit more, though, revocable trust, what we think about there is that's really a will substitute. It's a modern version of a will. Revocable trust, the purpose there is we want to avoid that probate process that I was talking about. That can be time-consuming, expensive. We want to make sure our heirs don't have to spend any more time in court than they have to, hopefully zero time in court, right? That's why we create the revocable trust. In irrevocable trust, you're giving up a little bit of control over the assets and you're getting something in return.
And what do we get in return?
For 99% of my clients, what they're looking for in return is long-term care benefits. Rather than paying out of pocket for long-term care, that's nursing home care or aides to come into their homes, they will create an irrevocable trust to protect the value of their home, to have Medicaid pay for that care rather than pay for it themselves. And for about 1% of my clients, or 1% of the population, irrevocable trusts are great vehicles for saving on estate taxes. But sitting here today, our estate tax exemptions for federal government, you have to have almost $14 million essentially. If you're a married couple, almost $28 million before you have $1 of estate tax. And New York State, it's about half of that. So a little over 7 million and a little over 14 million for a married couple. So as you can see, 99%, it's really about that long-term care when we're talking about irrevocable trust. But if you're in that 1%, there's a lot of really interesting trusts we can create for you as well.
Yeah, I know, having been through that process with my dad, he ended up with dementia and had not planned for that. He always planned that he was just going to live until he died at home. And he had his plan geared towards that. And no one mentioned to him that you might want to have some just-in-case plans in place. So it was like an 11th hour thing when it became clear he couldn't live on his own, that we needed to do some more serious planning around the potential of ending up in a long-term care home. Wow. Okay. So irrevocable trusts, that sounds like something you should really think about. How many people end up needing long-term care? Do you know statistics on that?
So I don't know the exact statistics on who ends up how many people need long-term care. And the other factor is, and what I've been telling my clients is the long-term care costs are getting so expensive because we have this generation that's now approaching needing long-term care, the baby boomers, and that's a generation of people that has just been unprecedented throughout their entire lives, right? Every system that we've had in place has almost been blown up by this generation, right? We saw this generation when it came to the schools, right? Towns were building school upon school upon school. The town my dad grew up in, they had 4 high schools. My dad was in high school. Now that town barely has 1 high school. Yeah. So that's just, it's natural that I think the baby boomer generation really can't rely on the previous generation's statistics on, well, this number of people needed long-term care, because we have a new generation that way more people are going to need the long-term care just by the virtue of people are living much longer. And by virtue of there's just more people, so more people are naturally going to need the care. So what I'm telling people is you really can't base it on, well, 10%, 20%, 30% of people, because we really just never know. And in an irrevocable trust, when we're talking about doing this Medicaid type planning for having the government pay for my long-term care rather than paying for that out of pocket, that has to be done 5 years in advance because we have a 5-year look back period in New York, which means that 11th hour planning, as you saw with your dad, it's very difficult to preserve assets at that point. Typically, you can preserve some, but you can't preserve everything. With houses, typically, especially people in New York, our houses are oftentimes our most valuable asset just because of the nature of real estate and how much it's appreciated. So what I tell people is whether you need that long-term care or not, this is going to protect the value of your home. You have to do it 5 years in advance. So you don't want to wait until you're 95 years old. You want to do this where you're going to have some comfort that I'm definitely going to make it the 5 years. And my hope for everyone is that no one goes to a nursing home. No one needs AIDS to come into their home. My hope is everyone just flips their Ferrari at 110 years old, and we never needed the long-term care, right?
Exactly. I'm going to slide into the grave going, whoo, what a ride.
And if that's the case, the irrevocable trust isn't going to hurt you because you're still avoiding probate with that irrevocable trust. So even if you never need long-term care, you'll still help out your family. So the irrevocable is never going to hurt you as far as it feeling like, oh, it was a waste, I didn't need the care. Regardless of whether you need the care, the irrevocable trust is going to be useful for your estate plan.
So who really needs a trust and who might not actually need a trust?
Sure. So when it comes to trusts, the method to the madness with the trust is about avoiding probate, right? Or it's about protecting the value of our homes. So naturally, a revocable trust, when people come to my office, my first question is, what kind of assets do you have? If you have even one probate type asset that we cannot, and a probate type asset, take a step back, is anything that does not have a beneficiary designated or could not have a beneficiary designated. So examples of when people come in after their parent has passed away, typically the only probate assets we're dealing with are their house and their bank account. Everything else usually has a beneficiary on it. So their IRAs are going outside of that probate process. 401ks outside of that probate process. Life insurance outside of that probate process, as long as we have that beneficiary designated. So in doing the trust planning, I tell people with your bank account, you can go to the bank. You can tell the bank, I want to add a beneficiary to this account. I want to make my bank account either pay on death or transfer on death, whatever term your bank uses. So that leaves your house. So if you have a house, we really should be creating a trust for that house. There's another way. You don't have to create the trust. You can just add your kids to the deed. That's not ideal. I'm sure we can discuss that in another podcast because that could take up an entire.
That'll take a minute, yeah.
Of why that's not ideal. That's a teaser for later on, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
The sequel.
So what about cars?
So the DMV has forms that we can typically transfer people's cars after death. We don't have to put people's cars in trusts. And the big thing with the trust is I feel like it's easy to tell people, it's easy to understand. You don't want your family to be in court, right? That's the easy part. The trust is going to make things seamless. The harder part for people is giving up a little bit of control over your assets because you've worked really hard your whole life to build up these assets, you and your spouse together, right? And you probably work 40, 50, 60 years before you come into my office. And then I immediately tell you, hey, let's sign this trust. Let's transfer all these things you worked really hard for into this trust, right? So
out of your name and into the trust.
Yeah, so that's a difficult pill to swallow for some people. But the key is with these trusts, revocable or irrevocable, you can maintain a lot of control over that asset. So you're not necessarily.
That's what I was going to ask you. Does it really mean you've lost control just because is the trust name on the title and not yours?
Absolutely. So a revocable trust, you haven't lost any control whatsoever over the property. In a revocable trust, you remain as your own trustee. You're the sole beneficiary of the trust. It's an alternate form of you still owning everything. What I tell people with a revocable trust, the analogy is if you open a business, right? That business can be a sole proprietorship and it's just your name and that's the business, or your business could be in the form of an LLC or a corporation. That doesn't mean just because your business is owned by that corporation that you don't own the business, you just own the corporation that happens to be the business. So that's how you own that business. So revocable trust, we haven't given up any control over anything. We haven't given up any rights to anything. Revocable
Yeah.
trust, we can put the house in, and then if you think I'm an idiot, you can take the house right back out. No harm, no foul. But an
Exactly. Well,
irrevocable,
yeah, that
we
was
can
the
give up
one
a
I was
little
going
bit
to
of
ask
control,
about.
right? So
Yeah.
irrevocable, you cannot be your own trustee. Depending on the type of irrevocable trust that you set up will determine how much control over those assets you can still have. So in the context of if you're setting up this trust for estate tax purposes, you're going to be able to have much less control over those assets, because in that context, the IRS wants to see that you've given up control over the asset. Those trusts are going to be a little more restrictive for who can be a beneficiary. You can't have the income, you can't have the principal out of that trust. Typically, you're setting up that trust for someone else's benefit.
Yeah.
In the
How do you,
context for the rest of us, the other
yeah.
99%, that irrevocable trust, what we're setting up in a Medicaid type trust is you still get all the income out of the trust. So if you're renting your house out, you still get that rental income. You can retain the ability to remove the trustees. If you don't like the trustee, you can replace them. As long as you can never be your own trustee. Your spouse can never be your trustee. But anyone else you could replace. If you don't like your kid anymore, pick a different kid, pick a totally different person. And you can reserve the right to change the trust beneficiaries. So that allows you to still update this if later on if your trust beneficiaries are your son and your daughter, you have a falling out with your son, you can always change the trust beneficiary to leave everything to your daughter. As long as I tell people, as long as you're on this side of the dirt, you can. There's a lot of changes we can still make to these trusts. So you're not giving up total control. You still are still going to maintain some control over the property.
Yeah. What kind of complexity does that add to, say, changing a primary residence? Say you decide, you know what, I want to downsize into one of these vacation retirement resort community
You're
situations.
moving to the villages. I understand.
Okay, so
Yeah. So
that's not going to stop us from doing that?
not at all. So you're still allowed to sell the property within the trust. The trustee has to be the one who signs the sales documents, and the trustee is the one who signs the documents at the closing. But the trustee is a figurehead position. You're telling them that you want them. You don't like this house anymore. Sell this house. You're telling them purchase this new property for me. The terms of the trust allow you to do that. The terms of the trust tell us that you can tell the trustee sell this house. You can tell the trustee purchase this new property for me. You pick the realtor, you pick the property. If your trustee refuses to go along with it, you retain the ability to remove them. So you remove that trustee, pick a trustee that will do what you want them to do. And if your trustee is really giving you a hard time, you always have that ability to change the trust beneficiaries. So you can say, listen, you're not going to be a beneficiary anymore. And the key with that downsize or changing the house is, we talked about that 5-year look back. You have to do all of this
Right.
5 years in advance. That 5-year look back, it doesn't restart if you sell the house, buy a new house. As long as the trust sells the old house and the trust buys the new house, your 5 years would continue on. Or if you've already met the 5 years, that new asset would be protected just like the old house was protected.
That is good to know. So having a trust, does this mean you completely avoid probate then? Is that an automatic pass-go, collect $200?
Oh, that would be great. But so the problem with trusts is that they actually have to be funded to work. So funding the trust means actually you have to actually move your probate type asset that you want to avoid that probate. You actually have to transfer the title into the trust. It's funny you say that, because I had a client a couple weeks ago. We signed all these estate planning documents. She wants to avoid probate. And then I say, okay, last thing, you've signed the deed to your house. Oh, I don't want to deed my house into the trust. I said, well, that's the whole
That was the whole
plan.
game here.
We gotta do that, or the whole plan really doesn't make sense. So she did it, of course. But that's the key element, is you actually have to fund the trust. So you have to sign that deed, move that property into the trust. If it's financial accounts, transfer those financial accounts into the trust. Bank account, retitle your bank account. You actually have to do the legwork of retitling. But I can promise you that legwork of retitling is much simpler than anything your kids would have to do in a probate.
Probate,
And
yeah.
most likely for the only thing you're gonna have to retitle is your house, and I'm gonna do that for you. I'll prepare the deed for you. You'll sign it when you sign the rest of your estate planning document. So it's really just part of the process. The only thing people have to do on their own is retitling bank accounts and financial accounts. But we walk you through that, and a lot of them probably don't even have to be retitled. You could just change the beneficiaries. But that's kind of a situational when we meet with clients. We walk them through what they have to do because we all have different bank accounts, financial accounts. Some people have pensions, so it's really situational. But we walk the clients through how they can best handle that.
So you mentioned that an irrevocable trust can help to get you on that Medicaid pathway. Does it also protect from nursing home costs or lawsuits or other events in life?
As far as other people suing you, it's not going to protect from that. In New York State, it's what's called a first party trust. So that's a trust you're creating with your assets for essentially your benefit. There's no creditor protection there. It's really the same protections you had now, which is nothing. People can sue you and get at that asset. That's still the case. If you have the asset go to your children in further trust, so that the house stays in trust after your passing and is in trust for your kids, that is a third party trust that has rock solid creditor protection. So we can't always create this creditor protection for ourselves, but in estate planning, we can create creditor protection for our kids through their inheritance, at least not their personal assets, but their whatever they inherit from us. We can make that so that's protected for them within the estate plan. But for ourselves, it's not going to be protected. The purpose of this is if people needed to go into a nursing home or if people need aides to come into their house, how are they going to pay for that?
Right.
Paying out of pocket gets very expensive very quickly.
Yes.
I think average nursing home care on Long Island is about $15,000 a month. Aides coming into your house is no less expensive. If you think about having to pay someone 20, 25, 30, 35, $40 an hour to be in your home, that's going to add up very quickly, right?
Yeah.
So the way a lot of people pay for that is having Medicaid pay for it. So Medicaid will pay for aides to come into your house. Easier said than done. Medicaid will pay for your nursing home care as long as you qualify. So Medicare, everyone gets at 65. To qualify for Medicare, you have to be 65, right? Medicaid, you could be 18 years old or you could be 118 years old. It's means tested. So you have to show that you are impoverished enough to qualify. And the key with houses, though, is they'll let you have a house up to $1 million of value and they'll still let you qualify. So a lot of times people say, well, no, I qualify for Medicaid anyway. It's fine. I don't need this. The problem is then they put a lien against your house to get the money back that they paid for your care. So it's really not them paying for your care. It's really them lending you the money to pay for your care.
Waiting
And then they're getting
patiently.
it back from the value of your house typically.
Yeah.
So doing these kinds of trusts, if you end up in the nursing home, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of cost savings for your family. And even if you never end up in the nursing home, you never need aides, it's still going to save your family a lot of time, money, and headaches from just not having to do the probate of your estate when you pass away.
So let's talk about some brass tacks here. What does it cost to set up an irrevocable trust like this that would get you onto the Medicaid if that turned out to be what you needed? And is it really worth it for the average Joe?
So I can't speak for all firms. I know my firm, I charge the same for an irrevocable, for a revocable, for just a will. I just charge a flat fee. That flat fee is based on the work that we need. So when people come in, I'll discuss the exact flat fee with them that we would charge for this matter. It's solutions based. So I don't want people to ever feel like they can't call me on the phone with a question. I don't want people to feel like, well, every time I send out an email, I get a bill in the mail for $20 of his time. I don't operate like that. You can call me as many times as you want. Email me. I'm here to answer your questions. So it's just a flat fee for your solution based. And I also don't want people to feel nickel and dimed like when I talk about I can create this creditor protection for your kids within your estate plan. I don't want people to feel like that's an upcharge. Doing a disposition remains as an upcharge. There's no upcharges here. It's we pay you come in for a consultation. I don't charge for the consultation. At the end of that consultation, I'll give you an exact quote on what your estate planning will be. And if you don't like it, you don't like me, you don't like the tie I wore, or you don't like that I didn't wear a tie that day, no harm, no foul.
Excellent. What are some of the mistakes that you see when people go online and create like DIY trusts, that sort of thing? They're going to save a couple of bucks.
In the context of Medicaid, the problem with a DIY trust is the trust is only as good if it actually works
Right.
for Medicaid, right? So, and you would only find out that it didn't work
When it
at
was
the
too
worst
late.
possible time when you
Yeah.
make an application to Medicaid and they tell you, "Oh, no, this trust for whatever reason, this isn't we still think the house is an asset. This trust, you retained a power you weren't supposed to retain." So that could be a big concern for
It
sure.
could be
Um,
huge. Yeah.
yeah, then, I don't typically see the DIY trust. I see a lot more DIY wills, and the problem there is just if you didn't, you have to actually execute it properly. You actually have to. So a lot of times with the wills, what I see missing is the witness affidavit. So a lot of times, the DIY wills, they tell you, okay, you have to have this witness by two people. But in New York, we also have an affidavit of attesting witnesses that we get the witnesses to sign so we don't have to find them after you pass away.
Right.
And a lot of times I've had these DIY wills where they signed it 15 years ago. Oh, that was the neighbor and that was the coworker. That was their neighbor and coworker 15 years ago. So we have
Yeah.
to track these people down to get them to sign something after the fact. So it's the formalities of execution can sometimes get people messed up. Um, and a lot of times the DIY, it's mostly DIY wills. It's not necessarily trust. So a lot of my DIY clients, they're asking me, couldn't have my parents have done something to avoid this awful probate process? And I tell them, yeah, they could have created a trust and we wouldn't be doing any of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing all that with us today, Daniel. This
Thank you so
has
much for
been
having me.
really insightful. And thanks for joining us on Estate Planning with Bernard Law. To connect with Daniel or to learn more about protecting your family's future, visit bernardestateplan.com. And remember to like, subscribe, and review the show and share it with someone you care about.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.